here at Northeast Ohio Medical University.
Thank you. Sarah Dugan?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Dugan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Pharmacy Practice and a mental health pharmacist at NEOMED.
Thanks, Sarah. I think that Doug Smith is going to be joining us at some point, but I don't see him on yet. So before going to David, because he's going to be sharing the didactics, I'm going to go to our tech support. So Jamie?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jamie Brewer, and I am your coordinator in tech support. So feel free to chat me if you have any questions with technology or in regards to Project Echo.
Kay?
I'm Kay Seibert. I work with the Ohio Opiate Program as a coordinator for Project Echo.
Denise?
Hi, I'm Denise Kropp. I'm a research associate in the Department of Family and Community Medicine, and I am the ECHO coordinator for the Project Grow ECHO.
Thank you, Denise. Emily?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Emily Murphy, and I'm the Director of Health Affairs here at NEOMED.
Thank you. As you can see, we're all involved in a variety of ECHO programs. Those of you that are brand new to ECHO, we have 7 of them running out of the Department of Psychiatry and Family and Community Medicine combined. And I actually lead our Friday integrated care session. So maybe if you guys are interested or enjoy this, you could join one of the programs as well. But for now, I'm going to introduce David Sharp. And David, tell them who you are, about yourself, and then you can start the presentation when you're ready.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. My name is David Sharp. I am a professor of health sciences at Kent State University. My research focus is mostly micro-behavioral or environmental changes that impact your nutritional health. And today I'm going to be talking about some behavioral changes that might be able to impact your health in the foreseeable future with this COVID situation going on. So I'll just start with the slides, I guess. Is that fine? All right. So the topic today is, oh, let me just push one more button. Sorry about that. The topic for today is social distancing good for you? Maybe. And the best way for me to explain this is to simply jump to the conclusion and then work our way to the conclusion a second time. And the reality is social distancing is fantastic for us, but it may not be good for you. So humans are community dwellers. We thrive in societies and we excel at creating things that are greater than ourselves. If you look at our hospitals, our buildings, our plumbing, our electrical, everything works when everybody is working together. That working together requires us to learn how to play nice with each other, learn how to be in a part of a community, learn how to help your neighbors with anything that is happening to them. So because of our background of being herd animals, our communities are really only as healthy as our sickest neighbors. In our current situation with COVID, this concept of physical or social distancing is removing a key element of our humanity and is exposing, I believe, some of the fragility that our society has and some of the fragility that our mental state also has. It is unnatural for us to be this socially or physically distant after creating norms and cultural behaviors that, let's say, shaking hands, hugging, going to sporting events, cheering for the same teams, all of these things are what we have internalized as normal. And to take that away takes away a piece of our humanity. And what we are seeing is that this social distancing or this physical distancing, at least again, anecdotally at the moment, because we're still only a few months into it, We are seeing some increases in abuse. We are seeing some increases in job loss, 26 million, relationship stress, mental health. But from the good for us versus good for you perspective, our ultimate goal with social distancing is to make certain that we have as many people alive and able to express their discontent over social distancing, because the alternative of increasing deaths is not pleasant. So before we begin on kind of the positives and negatives, how to get through social or physical distancing as resiliently as possible, I have a few slides on basically the utility of masks, as well as the reason for why we want to have this social distancing or physical distancing occur in the first place. So the first one, obviously, is reducing the transmission rate. So if you are not familiar with what transmission rate means, transmission rate is how many people you infect personally as a result of being sick. So a transmission rate of 1 means that you will infect one other person while you are sick. Infection rate of 2, of 3, they kind of add up to each other. So with social distancing, we are trying to reduce the transmission rate to as low a number as possible. So the best estimates that I have seen have modeled that COVID has a transmission rate of about 2.3 people per person. I have seen numbers as high as 3. I've seen numbers lower, but I think 2.3 is probably a pretty good estimate. So over 10 cycles, so you infecting your 2.3, them infecting their 2.3, them infecting their 2.3 10 times. If you have a transmission rate of 1.3, then over 10 cycles, you personally will have infected 14 people. A transmission rate of 2.3 over 10 cycles, 10 sicknesses, you will have infected 4,100 people. And a transmission rate of 3.0, so you infecting 3 who infect 3, on average over 10 cycles, you will have infected 59,000 people. So the goal of this distancing, the goal of our sacrifices right now, is to reduce the transmission rate and make certain that our hospitals are not overwhelmed. Because without any social distancing, without any masks, without doing anything to alleviate the infection rate, the transmission rate, we do have the capacity to overwhelm our healthcare and have individuals get sick without being able to gain access to proper medical care. Now, because this specific COVID is still relatively new, we do need to use a little bit of prior research on similarly sized viruses to model what we expect is going to happen. So a friend and colleague, Dr. Marr from Virginia Tech, has a lovely PowerPoint presentation about transmission and has allowed me to just show you 4 or 5 slides here on why masks and why social distancing or physical distancing are beneficial to us for dropping that transmission rate. So as you can see from this slide, SARS is about the same size as influenza, as the adenovirus. All of these viruses are not alone in floating through the air. They must be trapped in liquid or respiratory fluid in order to float through the air or stay viral or on the ground. So as you have additional respiratory fluid around it, the size of that particle increases from just the 0.1 micrometers up to 0.5 through 100 micrometers. And the size of these airborne viruses, or the respiratory fluid viruses, is going to determine both what we call it as well as how long it stays in the air and how long it stays viral on the ground. Now, we use this 5 micrometer cutoff as our distinction between large droplets and aerosols, but that distinction was created in the 1950s or earlier, and it doesn't really have a strong scientific basis for claiming that one floats through the air and is only capable of getting individuals sick from long distance versus short distance. New modeling of the coarse or the large droplets in sneezes suggest that the sneeze can project or propel, can propel these coarse droplets upwards of 18 or 20 feet. So 3 or 4 meters, like 4 or 5 meters rather than 6 meters. Wow, I'm American, so my feet are better than my meters. I'm sorry about that. So the 2 meter range is what we have been using partially as our justification for this social or physical distancing range, but that's not the whole story on how these work. So you can get sick through aerosols, through the fine particulates at close range, and you can get sick from the large droplets at a larger range than 2 meters. So masks, which are beneficial, have the ability to assist with really one of these and not the others. The N95 can do everything, but when you just look at your medical masks or the homemade cloth masks, you can see a difference, and I've circled it in red here on the slide, on how the masks are able to restrict coarse particles, but not necessarily fine particles. Now, I do have to kind of give a warning on this, that this was research that was done on the influenza virus. So it is possible that this is completely wrong. But since the flu virus seems to be the same size and requires the same amount of liquid droplets in order to transfer out, I feel pretty good about this being able to be generalized to COVID. And what you see is that if you are wearing just an ear loop surgical mask, you do get a drop in the top bar of coarse particles, but you don't really see a huge or statistically significant difference in the fine particles. And that makes sense. The fine particles are small enough that they can slip through the mask, and you're still going to be transmitting it. So one thing that we've spent a lot of time, not here, but in general, is talking about protecting the wearer. So if you have a mask on, what part of the protection, or how much protection do you get? There is a second part of the equation, which is source control. So if you wear a mask, every time you cough, your coarse particles are not exiting through the mask. So you may be sick, but you will not get other people sick. You will see a reduce in the transmission rate from you to others, even if you don't necessarily see a reduction in your own capacity for getting sick due to fine particles. This is important because asymptomatic transmission is prevalent. So research that I've read, and this is a horribly broad number because we don't know, but between 31 and 88% of the people that have tested positive, that's a huge number, but were either asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. So you have between a third and almost 90% of the individuals who can get others sick not knowing that they are sick. So wearing a mask in order to protect our community, those around us, and social distancing in order to protect our community, those around us, really become as important as making certain that we ourselves do not get sick. So the social distancing, physical distancing is this, again, this good for us rather than necessarily good for me situation. 6 feet away is a good recommendation, but even it has some context issues because there's more than just physical distance. There's temperature, there's humidity, there's airflow. So one other slide from Dr. Marr models out how long a droplet can remain in the air. So remember, 5 right about here is our difference between the aerosols and the coarse, the fine versus the coarse particles. So given perfect humidity and perfect temperature, if you are breathing or talking or singing, you can be releasing these fine particles that have the ability to remain in the air for 20 or 40 or 60 minutes. Whereas coughing, the particles will eventually land on the ground within 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or immediately, depending on the height of it. The reason why this is important is the masks really stop being effective, other than the N95s, right here. So social distancing or physical distancing is beneficial, but sitting 6 feet away, but filling up a church or a restaurant or a lecture hall or even an elevators aren't 6 feet, stairwell, the longer somebody is in or multiple people are there breathing, the more you are going to be releasing these fine aerosol droplets into the air and slowly increasing the amount in the air to be to get to levels where you can infect other people. So the masks do one thing. The masks keep the course. The distancing diffuses the fine particles, and the two combined start allowing us to protect not only ourselves, but everybody around us. The final part is recent research, and again, I have to put a little warning on this. A pre-printed paper has not been peer-reviewed, so I would put this with a grain of salt, but 2 recently released papers are showing that being indoors is far worse for you with respect to getting sick than being outdoors. So the China study, they looked at 318 outbreaks and only found 1 where the people were outside and infected each other while maintaining social distance. In Japan, almost 19 times greater risk of getting transmitted or transmitting the virus in a house or a building rather than going outside. So that suggests that physical distancing or social distancing, if you do it right, does not need to be everybody sitting at home. There are some rules and regulations that we can follow in order to ensure that we have at least some socializing without necessarily everybody sitting in your house. So the final preprint paper, again, mathematical modeling, if 60% of the population will wear a cloth mask when they go outside, and that cloth mask is just 2 layers of your favorite shirt or your least favorite shirt, you can reduce transmission rates to even below 1. So is social distancing good for us? Yes, there are some issues we'll get into, but if we start getting as a community a program that we all buy into, then it allows individuals who can't buy into that program the flexibility to not buy into that program and still be protected. It's kind of like herd immunity from a external perspective. Now, I've been using social distancing and physical distancing at the same time. I feel like, just for clarification, physical distancing is the best word for us, because social distancing implies that you can't be social. You have to be distant. And that's inherently not true. You can be as social as you would like. You just have to modify how that social is being presented. And I have seen from my own students that they have felt like they just shouldn't talk to anybody. They shouldn't go outside. They shouldn't go to church. They shouldn't do anything other than sit at home. And that is isolation or quarantine. That is what you should do if you are sick with the virus. You know it, or at least you believe it. Or you've been told by your doctor that there isn't a test, but all signs point to yes. That's very different than what we really need to be promoting or requesting people do. And that is physical distancing. That is making certain that you are not in an area where everybody is breathing heavily or everybody is sitting close to each other. Everybody should be outside. And we're getting into summer, so that's nice. But if we can follow masks, if we can follow the physical distancing, if we can learn to do some things online, then we can retain our mental resilience as best as possible, while still trying to get that transmission rate lower than it is now. Because many of us, and like personally, my own personal story for this is I have lost the ability to sleep longer than 5 hours. That's just my new thing with this physical distancing. There's something about not seeing my students every day, not going out, not doing anything, that my body just refuses to sleep anymore. And I feel, again, anecdotally, that is the loss of community that I have felt. We are going through it differently, but for me, that's where I am. Now, everybody during this physical distancing, during this situation, is going to have a different narrative. And that narrative of how well you are able to cope or how well you are able to participate socially is based off of what has happened to you as a result of this physical distancing. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but my wife works from home, and she had a wonderful stay-at-home job because I went to work and the kids, my 3 kids went to work or went to school. It's work for them. But now with everybody back in the house, it is more difficult for her. So what happened to your job situation is going to affect your interest or your ability to stay true or to stay with the social physical distancing expectations. Your age. There was a lot of media stating that young people are immune to it. By pushing that narrative that the young don't have to worry about death, we inadvertently pushed the idea that the young could go out and party. When you have that narrative with asymptomatic transmission, you are increasing transmission rates instead of decreasing it. But you have these roles. These roles can blur in between each other. So working longer hours, when you have lost the work-home balance where I only work at work and I only play at home, how does that affect your emotional or your mental state or your family dynamics when, if you're working from home now, you can work whenever you want? So you have these narratives. These narratives are then combined with your actual living situation. So I have seen, and there have been emails or messages to me where people have said that this social physical distancing has been fantastic because it's more time with the family and we get to go out into the backyard. We get to play video games with each other. We get to jog around the neighborhood. And that doesn't relate to many of our individuals in society. If two people living in a studio apartment together can have a very happy life if they both leave all day and come back. But once you start limiting individuals' abilities to find private space, to find alone time, to interact with others, you are going to start increasing some strife and stress that wouldn't have been there when you had a natural release valve. Alternately, individuals who are living in a very rural lifestyle right now that are being told that they need to physically distance themselves doesn't really make a big change. If you're working on a farm and you're not seeing more than 1 or 2 people a day, it hasn't really hurt you at all. So learning from some prior research on how individuals cope with this isolation and with this forced lack of social events and group gatherings, NASA has actually spearheaded a lot of research on behavioral issues during long periods of forced interactions and it's some pretty extreme physical distancing. They looked at 10 journals at the International Space Station, and they were able to list the 10 most repeated and prevalent behavioral issues that were embodied by the astronauts. And I think the list is fairly comprehensive of what we're going through right now. There are work issues, there are food issues, there are sleep issues, the inability to get away, group dynamics, and leadership have been major issues that needed to be addressed. And NASA does actually have some good programs on conflict resolution and leadership during times of extended social isolation. It's a fantastic read if you enjoy this stuff. But these are the things that we are dealing with right now with our work at home culture, with working from home, with having kids at home, that should be addressed and need to be addressed to ensure that we are not falling into the same behavioral issues that were associated with pretty much the most extreme physical distancing that you can get. Now, some of those habits that we have found, and these are kind of your takeaways that as health professionals, you should be observing or at least asking about, is kind of this problem with the idle mind, where we have a lot more free time. Our health professionals do not, but kind of your lay person, we have lost all of our routine. So you have this concept of food just being your only scheduling for the day. So even though appetite is a biologically driven behavior, we express it in a socio-cultural environment. We wake up, we have breakfast, we have lunch, we have dinner, and that's all we look forward to. So things that we need to consider is how is your sleep schedule? Do you have routines? Do you have an additional issue with echo chambers, where now that you're at home, do you have one news station on and you're only listening to that? Like, where can we, not where can be, but what can we do to not just sit and let our mind take control of it, or let our mind wander. So our healthy habits are, there's a note, I think. Oh, never mind. Our healthy habits Yep.
Yeah, David, don't worry. We'll get to the questions after you're done with your slides.
I was just worried that you had sent me a note that said I'm talking too long, because that's pretty normal for me. So
Well,
sorry.
I know you're close to the end of your set, so it's okay. Go ahead.
I am. So you're healthy. So again, I just want to leave the unhealthy habits up for just one more minute, because relationship stress is becoming quite prevalent. Divorces in China are reported to be at an all-time high. And I put a quote in there because we put up with a lot from our significant other because we expect that they are giving as much as we give. And one of the issues with staying at home 24 hours is it perhaps exposes some unequal commitments to raising families, to working at a job, or to even investing in your own relationship. We're seeing increases in gambling, we're seeing increases in screen time, and then we are seeing that individuals are becoming more mindless. And if you don't know what the phrase mindless means, it is effectively to do things on impulse rather than to think things out. Many of us thrive on routine. We thrive on knowing what we're doing every day. When you lose that, you can become depressed, you can become lonely, you can become destructive, and it is difficult for others to see that because you do not have the ability when looking at somebody to see a distressed mind in the same way that when you look at somebody you can diagnose a broken arm. So right now, because we have lost all of our social interactions, our groups, our soccer teams, our sports, our friendlies, our brain is effectively breaking because we don't know what's wrong. And that I'll get into on the lecture in 2 weeks. But we don't really see how much our brain is trying to recover or heal itself in the same way that we would have seen it if we had actually gotten a physical injury. These things can lead to also loss of friends, breakups, weight gain, acquisition of new bad habits, financial uncertainty, increases in spousal and child abuse. So there are some fairly negative trade-offs that physical distancing may be causing if we allow ourselves to be mindless. The healthy habits, things that we can do as resilience or as a way of keeping control of our society, is to actually create a schedule, to be a leader, to ask people what they are feeling or how they are doing, and demanding an honest answer. Because often you will get the "how are you fine" response, but that's not what we need right now. So you all need to make certain that you are asking how people are and you're actually interested in knowing. But then you need to be truthful that if somebody is asking how you are and you're not well, you will respond with what's wrong. But we do have this ability to build things better. So if we go about this the right way, we can change some bad habits, namely the opportunity for meetings that could have been handled as an email to be handled as an email. Allowing this almost to be a renaissance of, if you do have the ability to have some spare time, to learn a skill, a musical instrument, learn to bake, and to make certain that you are providing for self-care. Self-care is not selfish, because if you as a person, or me as a father, or you as a healthcare professional don't take care of yourself and don't remain resilient, then you are not going to be able to accurately serve and assist all of the people who rely on you. And we are seeing in our healthcare some increases in stress and post-traumatic stress disorder that need to be addressed and need to have better engagement in order to make certain that we are healthy so that we can keep our communities healthy. So in conclusion, and I think I went a little bit over, social distancing is great. Each person's appreciation of social distancing is going to be a combination of your role, your access, your defense against unhealthy habits, your willingness to engage in healthy ones. In some, we are honestly participating in the very new and novel form of socializing that blurs the lines between work and home, between digital and physical relationships. And it requires us to learn how to retain those relationships with those we are now physically distant from, while bolstering relationships, he said lovingly to his wife, with those we can no longer avoid. So we don't have to be perfect. 60% is good enough. The trick is to not believe that social distancing or physical distancing is binary. It's not that you're either doing it or you're not. It is everybody working together to ensure that our community stays healthy. So with that, I will stop so that there is time for questions, but thank you very much for your time.
David, that was an absolutely remarkable overview of all of the science and the logic behind masks and why we have these social distancing, the physical distancing orders in place. It actually helped me to better understand how to even talk to my kids about it. So I thank you very much. I do want to encourage everyone who has any questions or comments to use the chat box. At this point, we only have a couple. So the first one is from Marty Willman regarding fine droplet suspension. And we begin to get as we begin to gather again. Have you seen recommendations for the maximum length of time that people should be together when inside?
I will do my best to answer that. That is a fantastic question. The issue with that is there's a minimum that a minimum of virus that you need to inhale in order for it to be transmitted to you. And that is going to be so dependent on how much somebody is exhaling that it's going to be individualized. So we have some anecdotal stories. So there was the one lady at the church choir that sang for an hour, and 58 or 60 of her choir friends all became infected. But there is another individual who flew from Tokyo to San Francisco while wearing a mask and didn't get anybody infected. So unfortunately, the whole maximum length of time inside is going to be dependent on how much that one person or multiple people are all exhaling, but it's also going to deal with the airflow in the building. Because honestly, if you, we'll just use a church as an example, if they brought in those NFL style super fans and blew the air really quickly, then you probably don't have a time limit on how long you could be in that church. But if you had a church with all of the doors closed and the air conditioner or the heater turned off and nothing moving, then you have a fairly limited time frame before you need to get out. So unfortunately, it's not just this binary 15 minutes and go. So I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than that.
So the next question that we have, I would encourage, not only yourself, David, but the rest of our panelists to jump in and give some thoughts on it, is what do you recommend for those who are isolated and live alone, and maybe if they start to lose their ability to interact well with others socially?
I'll let somebody else take that if they want to. Otherwise, I will keep talking.
Jen, go ahead.
I think that's a very good question because, especially if you live alone, you're caught in that circumstance of not already having those relationships, and it's further isolating when you feel like you can't go out and about. And so I think there's plenty of ways in which you could adopt some measures of social connectivity through the internet medium, in which to find common interests and ways to find that. There's been some really amazing links and things that have been really bringing people together. We've been looking at Chatter Pack. That's more kind of touring places and looking at things, entertaining oneself. But I think, being very careful as you choose those communities to make sure that they're healthy ones, but you have the chance to discuss those things and bring in that. And I think also, from what David's talking about, it doesn't sound like we're completely confined to the home, that we will be able to have that opportunity to go out and about as long as we're taking the precautions that we need. And so by doing that, by going out to a park or what have you, that prevents the conversation with the close distancing, but there's still opportunities to communicate with others.
And Sarah or any of the other panelists, do you have some thoughts or comments? I have a couple thoughts of my own, but I'll let you guys go first.
No, I agree with what Jen had said. I think that it's an opportunity to look for other ways to connect with individuals. And I think as things do start to open, potentially even being really mindful of what type of interaction it is that you're looking for. If it's kind of passive interaction where there are people that are just around, being able to kind of seek that out in small doses, obviously distanced appropriately, but to help kind of get that back in place.
The one thing that it made me think of, and I'm speaking just from a little bit of a more lengthy memory, I had been looking into the impact of video games and online gaming on your socialization skills in teenagers, just mostly being a parent of teenagers. And there actually had been some literature that showed for kids who had some social anxiety and some like awkward interactions in person, if they were able to use online gaming to hone some of those skills, that was actually effective for a number of them. So I think if we can find ways to connect people, online now, and it certainly can, there's the potential to not totally lose our skills around that. But I also believe that Dr. Smith is on with us now. So Doug, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to contribute to this question. Okay, I'm going to read the next comment real quick, but I do want to invite any of you who have a particular case that you would like to talk about, whether it's COVID related or kind of coping with the pandemic related. Please do, let us know if you have a case that you'd like some feedback on and like the community to give you some input. We definitely would like to hear that.
Nicole, I just have one further comment, just to kind of thinking about how to. I was thinking about how we've been adapting within our household. We're naturally introverted family in and of ourselves, but not this introverted. And there are groups of people that we have been connected with. And I'm finding that just even with my work associates, that what had been a meeting that was once a week had become more on a daily basis check-in, that we are visually seeing each other, and we can see those facial expressions, and that we're checking in because we normally have that kind of daily interaction within the office. So that's one way in which to encourage that. When we look at gaming, you don't really know, and some of that kind of goes into kind of fantasy world kind of scenarios. So while there is some good interaction there, you also don't, it's hard to gauge those intentions. So much about the therapeutic process or just socialization is being able to read someone's facial expressions and see. And so in a different group that we're part of, we have been checking in just once a week in just kind of sharing, how's your week been going? How have these things been going? You know, and whereas we normally wouldn't get all of those conversations taking place, because if I walked into a room and only talk with one person for that week and the other group would crowd. So we actually, everybody got to the point of sharing. So it's hard to do, but it's manufacturing those scenarios, or just like I said, just kind of finding those opportunities to connect with someone with common interests.
Thank you so much. So the next question is from Verlaine. As a parent of school-age children, what recommendations, if any, do you have for kids to interact with each other as the weather becomes warmer and they want to play with other kids?
So I'm back, sorry. With that, I mean, we've had some struggles with that as well. So what we have been doing right now is we have 3 scheduled play dates over Zoom with the other kids, and we have our favorite board games. So I know that that is not the same as actual running around and playing with the kids, but we have put together some bicycle groups, because with biking, you are typically 6 feet away from each other and moving quickly outside. So teaching your kids how to bike and then having bike dates. If again, that it's a little, I'll call it a little elitist, because I live somewhere that bikes are safe and easy to use. So if you're in an area that doesn't involve biking, it requires a little bit more creativity in coming up with a game or a sport that doesn't involve touching and does involve a little bit of distancing. So we do board games with the other kids. We do, my parents do some reading where they will share a screen and the kids will read out loud. And then we do bicycling or kicking a soccer ball, because I don't think there's a lot of transmission of the virus kicking it back and forth. So we try and play games that don't involve touching with your hands or face. So that's my recommendation. It's not perfect. Again, making certain that people are still alive to complain is the goal.
And with this kid, or with this question being so broad, I mean, I'd really like to invite suggestions from anybody in the community. So if you have something and you'd like to type in what suggestions you have or ideas, or even unmute yourself and tell us what your suggestions are. And I imagine that this is an issue that many, many people are dealing with and trying to find solutions for bored kiddos. And since we know K-12 are shut down for the rest of the school year, even as the world goes back into the workplace, those kiddos are still going to be home. And those of us, those with school-age kids are still going to be home trying to figure out how to keep them healthy and safe.
One of the things that my daughter has done and one of her other friends have done is they are part of a volleyball club. And that club started doing some workouts on Instagram. And so they would do the workouts on Instagram, but they would also FaceTime each other at the same time. So it's a lot of use of technology, but they were able to interact while doing something and getting some physical exercise. And I know for those who aren't in clubs and things like that, the YMCAs are providing a lot of that. And so they may have some opportunity to be able to kind of do some side-by-side exercise and talk to each other while doing that.
One of the
Thank you,
things that
Christine. That's a great idea.
I'm sorry, Nicole. One of the things that we've engaged in and have found really helpful at our household has been like virtual museum tours. Things like the Akron Zoo is doing some really phenomenal like live Facebook feeds on their animals. There's I know Washington, D.C. has a lot of virtual museum tours that you can go on. And one of my favorites, and this started because our teachers actually were doing it, they were doing virtual scavenger hunts. And like one lesson was on find a trapezoid or go find a parallelogram. And then you would get points based on, you know, if you found that, like if you find a trapezoid, it's worth 3 points or whatnot. So lots of different creative ways to keep them engaged with their peers. And even for me, I have fun playing the shape game. So it's.
Again, there
That's
was,
awesome. Thank you.
I came across this link again. It's called Chatter Pack, and I think it's a mom just compiling all these virtual visits and kind of focused on kids and activities. And so it's just opened up to not just museum visits, but also crafting and all of that could be done in community. You know, you can put the phone up and while you're doing the craft at your own house, at the same time kind of seeing how other kids are doing it as well. And then going back to what Nicole was saying, you know, video games too, that's what my kids are doing a lot of animal, whatever it's called, animal. It's Crossing. That's what it is.
Is it Animal Crossing? I'm trying to think of what my son plays.
Yes.
I think that might...
Yes. We had tears and meltdowns regarding that one. So sorry.
I'm going to throw some input in there because my kids are not of the age where they're really tech savvy. We didn't have a lot of technology in our home. They're 6 and under. And we're lucky enough to have a big yard. So a lot of it has fallen on me. And it's like the coloring and those types of activities, but we're doing it for others. So we're coloring and then we're sending it to grandmas or sending it to the neighbors. So those types of activities have helped the kids. My daughter is loving this because she never wanted to be separated anyway. So those are different things that I have done to forego technology just because they're not really there yet with it.
This is Doug. I'll chime in. Sorry I was late because the award ceremony for the medical school ran late and then I had to do some other stuff. And I think from a distance, I heard Nicole ask me if I had an answer to a question, but I hadn't heard the question, so I stayed silent. I'll just mention a few things, actually the whole age range. So my 2 teenage sons, definitively gamers. And interestingly, as we've talked about, if we were to consider them getting together with friends, like literally, which is, you know, not appropriate, but still we discussed it, they've actually been pretty good about being happy with their gaming. They game, they're talking at the same time. Some of the games they can see each other. It's not Animal Crossing. It's much more about role-playing shoot 'em up games. So CS, Go, and all these other ones I've never played, but look pretty realistic. Another thing is one of my son's his friend's girlfriend had a birthday, and they therefore all got in their cars individually, drove to her house. The mother was aware. They, in their cars with their windows rolled down, all facing the house, sang happy birthday to the girl, etc. I mean, that was good. And then up the street here, a neighbor who I don't know, it's too far up the street for me to know the person, apparently had a 40th birthday. And probably for 20 minutes, I'm going to say last Tuesday or thereabouts, I just kept hearing cars beeping. So eventually, of course, I went outside and I saw they just kept circling part of the block there. There was a big 40 sign they stuck out. I mean, it really was quite nice to see that approach. And then I heard that some parents of some younger individuals, kids, they actually did something unique because it helped both the parents and the kids. They drove to like a parking lot, parked far enough away, all rolled their windows down, and the kids talked to each other and the parents talked to each other, yet they were socially distanced, and they all enjoyed it a lot, apparently. It's why I've heard they're going to do it a second time. So I think there are creative ways both technology and not technology, that everyone's learning to cope at the whole age range. Obviously, us adults need connection as well. And since I'm not likely to start playing CSGO against Emily and Nicole, you know, I probably need to come up with something else. So.
So lots of great suggestions and a lot of good suggestions in the chat box too. So thank you all who have been contributing to giving some ideas in the chat box. I do want to go to our next question from Patricia, asking for suggestions for those who do not have or use the internet, such as elderly people living in hut housing, or maybe people with severe mental illness, you know, people within a poverty range where these kinds of tech ideas aren't really options.
I think that does present quite a challenge, because we are talking about a very vulnerable population as well, with COVID. I think, you know, if there are family or friends who are able to support someone who is feeling isolated, I think, you know, helpful things would be getting into more hands-on kinds of things, like dropping off an activity of something that could make them feel like they're being useful, you know, making masks out of materials. It depends on their ability, of course, on what they're capable of doing. But, you know, that is really, really tough. I'm kind of stumped with that one, because we have leaned in so much for the internet and those electronic capabilities. But, you know, I think if we think about it, you know, what did people do before we had computers and everything, right? There was congregation, of course, which, you know, is a challenge at this time, but music, art, encouraging, writing, reading, those are all just those core go-to things that can certainly be helpful.
So on that same kind of, to piggyback on it, we still have regular telephones. And the telephone itself, which, if you guys, the people under 30, it's a cell phone that does nothing. Like my wife, I'll use her as an example. Every 2 or 3 days, she has a half-an-hour phone call with both of her grandmothers. And both of her grandmothers do not have any technology. They live alone. They are basically practicing physical social distancing on account of their age and their lack of ability to be mobile. So just because you don't have technology as internet, or you live in a impoverished or HUD or low income, doesn't mean that not having an internet means that you are unable to be social. So if they weren't doing any of these things before, they can continue using the technology that they were using before. They, if they have the ability to go outside, if you didn't have technology to be internet savvy and social, you were probably talking to your neighbors. You can continue to do that. Stay outside, stay 6 feet away. If you don't have the internet or anything, you can get a book. The libraries are closed, but there are book shares. You can still have book clubs and book groups, just everybody sits outside and reads together. So there are options. We don't all have to become digital gurus. We can continue to rely on the more stable technologies.
I'm reflecting, one of our coworkers has been doing just that. She's been going up to the window of the nursing home of where family members are at and just talking, you know, and just checking in. There's a picture of them communicating with the glass between, but I know quite a few people have been doing that as well. Thanks for the reminder about how we've lost sight of our technology. We have a rotary phone in our house.
Dr. Papp, you are unmuted. What would you please?
Yeah, I think that I'm in addiction right now, okay? And we're seeing the problems that David alluded to in dramatic proportion. A lot of people are having an awful lot of problems. So our facility, we're going to start opening up and seeing clients, probably new clients, and those in trouble beginning May 4th. We're going to do it slow. We've been taking temperatures of our staff and obviously temperatures of the people coming in and whatnot. We're trying to set it up again for that social distancing, shall we say. I'm still doing Bureau Workers' Comp exams and whatnot, and we have to see those people physically. So you got to be a little bit creative at home. And maybe the neighbors walking down the street and things like that, you set up a rectangular table at the entrance of your garage. You have chairs on one side, you're on the other side. You have face masks there, you know, if they don't have their own. And we exchange cookies and desserts and stuff like that in the community. A lot of older folks, you know, have physical problems and whatnot. You can call your neighbors, you know, every couple of days and see how they're doing. Encourage them to get out in the street now as they are out walking. The weather's nicer. So we have the expectation everybody wears a mask. The distancing is maintained. And as people have trouble getting through this, even getting to the store and whatnot, we've got even a network of green signs in your window, you're okay. Red sign, you need somebody to stop by to go to the store. So that we have in our community red, green, and I think we got one yellow thing, you know, so that we can kind of keep touch. This is going to be here 12 to 18 months. And I think the misinformation that we keep getting is contrary to the science. Masks are needed, both sides, everybody, okay? Governor DeWine, he took a hit on this here, and it's kind of unfortunate that the politics and, you know, people's desire to get out and get going, they just can't avoid the science. So as in our neighborhoods, open our garage door, put something, chairs 6 feet away or something, they're walking down the street and want to stop and chat, hey, that's okay, as long as you got your mask. And then what we can do to help our other folks, addiction practice, we got to see them physically. They got to see us because they're in trouble, okay? And we signed up for this, okay? And when we signed up for it, you know, we got to do our part to, again, keep people engaged in their recovery and in what we do, you know. And just pay attention to the science and what David said. I really think that's great, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had another question come in from Avis Brown saying, normally families still have contact with each other because it's a small trusted group. Is it possible to have another trusted place or / small group of 2 to 3 people to connect with to ease the stress of being surrounded only by those you live with?
So, I mean, I'll jump on that. So the answer is yes, you can, but the answer is also don't do it, because you have to make certain that you can trust them. So I posted this in the chat. We had this issue with it during HIV, when HIV was becoming prominent. Partners lie to each other, friends lie to each other, and they're not completely honest with who they have slept with or who they have interacted with. And in order to ensure that your 2 to 3 people are actually staying true to it, you have to trust them completely. So if I have 2 to 3 people that I hang out with, and my wife has 2 to 3 people, and my kids have 2 to 3 people, I'm up to 45 people now. And if any one of us goes to the grocery store or to church or to a park and we accidentally get sneezed on or touch a doorknob, we are now infecting 45 people rather than just 5. So the 2 to 3 in theory works, but all you're doing is exponentially increasing both your risk of getting it and your risk of giving it. So I would say if you can avoid it, don't do it.
Thank you, David. And I want to get to the next question because it touches on some conversations I've had with even people in my personal circle, all online, I promise. But from Robin, she said, my kids are 9 and 11, and my friends' kids are younger, but we both noted our kids talking about dying and death and fear since all of this started. So are there suggestions for how to help kids feel less anxious?
I also have an anxious kiddo, and I want to think that I got this I'm about to share from Ohio Moss. They shared it on their social media, and I saved it and I actually sent it to my husband, and we're like, hey, this is just good check-in for us because we do have some anxiety within our house. So it's really, and I know David talked about it, being a role model and making sure we're taking care of ourselves, because then they pick up on those things. It's really easier for us because we have the really small kids, but I'm sure it also translates into the older generation, older kids as well. And I will make sure that we include this in any post-session wrap-up documents that we'll email out. So there's a lot of really cool things here: family time, stay connected, self-care, don't panic, and just be accessible so that when they are having those, just having those open, candid conversations.
Thank you so much for that, Jamie.
I think
Go ahead, Jen.
those tips are really great. I think that, that it's kind of finding that middle ground of just being, taking those precautions, fair, it's so hard to find middle ground for kids and explain what that is. But there are things in the world that can bring harm, but we don't want to make them feel like it's around every corner. And so it's normalizing that experience. If you take those precautions, and we're going to, be respectful of the health of others and ourselves, then it's being aware, but taking the precautions and putting it in the middle ground, but also not denying that, oh no, you're completely safe, And so I like that list that Jamie just showed, because it's just being very transparent, but at the same time, just recognizing that, that there's a lot of things, and that's where we talk about with our own office when we reconvene back into our office space. What is that going to look like? And there's a lot of things that could take us out of this world that may not relate to this. So, you take the reasonable precautions you can, and kind of navigating with that. And making them feel secure within the home, and knowing that just within the family, and that's a lot of what those suggestions are kind of building, is building that security within the household and the family, that these things are safe and fine. We have normalcy, we have routine. I can lean into these things and feel comfortable.
This doesn't necessarily answer the question, but I run a small nonprofit in Uganda, Africa, and the concept of not talking to our children about dying and death is very culturally focused. So in Uganda, average size of the family is between about 4 and 7 children, and most families expect to lose 1 or 2 of those children before the age of 5. So dying and death has become more normalized when you have higher mortality rates. This is very new to us as a country, and we are struggling with it. And again, this is not an answer, but it is something that has been normalized in other cultures, and I don't want it to be normalized here, but it is something that 9 and 11-year-olds can at least understand conceptually. I personally don't think they should have to, but children are far more capable and competent than we usually give them credit for. And as long as I think Nicole had said, as long as we maintain that leadership role model and allow them to have a sense of stability and to use us as a foundation to build off of, we can have difficult conversations and work through them.
I just want to piggyback on that. So I have a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old at home. And one of the things that we've done, they obviously have some degree of autonomy. My husband and I both are still working remotely from home, but we recognize they're able to access a whole bunch of information. So one of the things that we've done is identifying that, you know what, this is kind of a scary time. How are you doing? What are you seeing? What are you hearing from other people? Because what they see and hear may be different from what we see and hear. So really opening up the dialogue to be able to have that discussion. So maybe it's not something they would normally, he's getting graham crackers out. Hurry up. Maybe it's not something that they would normally bring up for discussion, but if there's an opportunity that's laid right there, hey, this is a safe space to, I'm just curious what you've seen, because there's a ton of information out there, and that really even allows them to be, I think, a little bit more in a position of power to say, oh, well, I saw this information. And it doesn't mean you need to know all about it, but it's an opportunity to be like, hey, let's go look at that. Let's see, you know, what there is to that particular story, to help deconstruct it a little bit. And we found that to be a little bit helpful. It definitely helps with the conversation, because that's a tough one to start sometimes.
Yeah, thank you all. These are great suggestions. And one of the things that I was thinking about that's kind of funny, just, you know, to self-disclose a little bit, I think I was very early on introduced to the concept of death and dying, just because my mom was a mortician for a number of years when I was little. So it was nothing to be asking for help with math homework while she was doing, like, while she was actually embalming somebody. But that is not the standard for most people. So finding ways to have these conversations and introduce the topic is probably something that we should get better at, even though we always hope that we don't have to, or that even if the need isn't there, we probably should start introducing these concepts in a more universal way. We have 15 minutes left. I want to remind everyone that we are offering continuing education credits for this. So if you go to eeds.com, that's EEDS.com, or use the app, which I highly recommend because it's easier, and enter the code 50MOON, 50MOON, you will get 1.5 hours of continuing education credit for today. And we will have a survey that we ask that everyone complete at, after this session, just to give us some feedback. So look for that in the chat box. But we still also have some time for questions or comments. So please either enter a question in, or feel free to unmute yourself. Are there lingering thoughts from our panelists?
Well, I have no problem filling a gap. That's getting me to shut up. That's the hard part. This has been almost a renaissance for my grandmother. So she's 95. She lives alone. She is very hard of hearing. And with my whole family, my parents, my siblings, other cousins, having all of this free time, we were able to buy her some Bluetooth-enabled hearing aids, and handed her an iPad. And my grandmother has never interacted with this many of her family members in quick succession than from this quarantine. So it is not good or good news to have this, but there are ways that we can adapt to bring in other family members that perhaps, or even friends that we have perhaps fallen distant from on account of being too busy to interact with them. So I do enjoy the rapid advancement of technology that has allowed these digital calls and relationships to very much start simulating physical interactions.
I personally love that idea of your grandmother getting more connected to people right now. I mean, it's a very cool thing. I'm seeing lots of people in the chat talking about their children, particularly teenagers, becoming nocturnal creatures. Yes, I think that is universal. 3 a.m. gaming, and actually from talking to the medical students, mostly the M3s that said this specifically, but I think it applies to possibly some of the M4s as well, talking about gaming well into the night, 3 a.m. being pretty standard. But it does help them stay connected, which is a good thing.
I have a question for everybody, I guess. So what are you all doing individually to help you cope with this? What's working, what's not working? I think in my household, one of the rules is when I wake up, I do not put the news on. Like, I do not want the TV on. I don't want to hear about it. And actually, I won't put it on all day long. And the only way I'm getting my information, good or bad, is to my husband, like, so what did they say today, or what's happening? Because I find it so overwhelming, you know, when our work is impacted. Comments in the box are making me laugh. When our work is revolved around COVID-19 with these sessions that we're setting up, it's hard for me to hear it on the news as well. So what is everybody else doing? Are you walking, exercising more, cooking?
Exercising, doing a lot of running. And even though my body's getting old, knees are giving out or what have you, but finding being outside brings a lot of sense of peace. And doing more outdoor activities with our family and finding alternatives for that. And getting into some old school kind of things, like teaching my daughter how to sew on a sewing machine. And, you know, we do have the techs, you know, I have older children, they're gaming, but at the same time, there's been a lot of, I think you're backed into a corner for new creativity and invention. And I think those things are the things, you know, from a therapist point of view, are the grounding things that can really kind of fill your soul, you know, because you're being mindful and you're doing those things.
So what I teach in one of my classes is that you have to actually do something about 30 to 40 times in a row for it to become internalized as a habit rather than just as a curiosity. So my whole family, we have basically decided to pick one thing and keep doing it until it is normalized. So for me, I'm getting out of bed and I'm doing 15 push-ups before I start my life, just because once that becomes habitual, then I don't have to think about it. I just go over and do my push-ups. We have, in my house, I have taught all 3 of my kids how to fish. I have, this didn't make it 30 days, but I got a good 1 day of trying to learn how to play the violin before my wife turned that off. So we're trying to pick up things that make us feel fulfilled, and that's going to be dependent on any of you, on what you all like to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that everyone should try to do an act of kindness every day. And I think that that in itself, you know, helps us relate to each other, that there's a need, and it sure makes me feel good. Whatever it is, you know, if you send your beautician $30 because you haven't seen her and unable to get your hair done, That's kind of an act of kindness. Some of our social are Rotary, and there's a great need for food now. And a lot of our food banks are empty. And we've even had drive-by food banks at some of our institutions. And it kind of gets people looking at each other and feel like they're doing something. But I think we need to really active kindness, because a lot of people are a lot worse off than we are. And I think we're blessed really to have what we have now. And you talk about Africa and, the third world countries. What's going to happen to them when the virus lands there? I mean, it's just unbelievable. So I don't know, try to do something nice for somebody every day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful suggestion. I really love that. I'll share what I'm doing to cope with this, and it's only a piece of it. I'm spending a lot of time with my dogs, and they get lots of walks. But their separation anxiety when I go back into the office is going to be high. But one of the things that actually really provides me quite a bit of joy and helps a lot is these kinds of sessions. Pedro Ballester typed it into the chat box. For our Friday Integrated Care Echo, that's become a really strong, solid community for me to connect to every week, and for all of us to be able to really stay connected. All of the Echo programs that we have throughout the week are really a source for me to stay connected and feel that sense of community that we would otherwise lack. That's one of my things. That and a lot of movies.
One thing that I've done is I've downloaded the Disney Plus app. We were not streaming that before this quarantine, and I was hesitant on when we were going to do it. So once they closed schools for the remaining of the school year, I'm like, we're getting Disney Plus, and every Friday we pick a new movie. And last Friday was Little Mermaid, and it was a blast.
Our household isn't so heady. We've been doing old Magnum PI binging. And there's like 20 episodes in even just season 1, and there's 8 seasons. So it's going to last us a good long while. And kind of hoping that Fantasy Island will come out soon, the classic, not the new. But I'm kind of dating myself at this point.
So on the act of kindness note and things to do, there's a question about, are there still volunteer opportunities out there, such as food banks or things that you could bring a 12-year-old child to also help? So if people have suggestions or resources that they can share to, just ideas to get people involved, that would be great.
It's not quite official volunteering, but one of the other things that my wife and I do is that we're foster parents, and we don't have foster kids right now, but we have a community of foster parents on the same email list. And so 2 or 3 times a week, my wife and I will cook a large meal and deliver it to either the doctors and nurses that we know, or the parents that have excess kids due to their own fostering things. And so again, it's not an official volunteering, but just looking out and seeing who in your network has need or would benefit from being able to just take a night off from cooking has been one of the things that we've been doing.
It's a great suggestion. Other suggestions? We have just a couple minutes left.
There's one thing I wanted to make a comment on. I've been recently researching some things, and I came across a TED Talk by, the last name was McDonegal, I believe, Kelly McDonegal. And it's talking about how, stress we think of as innately really bad for us. We've had that kind of really streamed and, honed in on us. But, there's another kind of stress called eustress that is really good when we're surprised and excited, when we're having community with people and feeling those, that excitement. And they were talking about, well, what makes a difference? Because in one, for the heartful stress, it releases hormones that can really kind of degrade your body and take a toll. But when when you frame stress in a different way, like the eustress, and you're in community with others, there's actually that oxytocin release, which actually can be strengthening to you and your body. So, I view that very much when we look at social connectedness and the importance of just being able to express oneself in a forum and talk. And it may not be face to face, although I've seen people do it in our driveways with distancing chairs and what have you. But still having that ability to feel heard and embraced and validated can really build up that sense of community. And so that's why, not to, when we, by giving to others, it helps activate that. And actually, you're not only helping others, you're also in many ways helping yourself.
Thank you, Jen. And that's, I think, a great point to end on, because it's positive, and that's what I think we need right now. I want to remind everyone that we also are going to have 3 more sessions of these. So 2 weeks from today, we're going to cover the pandemic of loneliness. 2 weeks from after that, we'll actually be talking about post-traumatic growth. And 2 weeks after that, we're going to take a specific honed-in look at COVID and the adolescent and kid population. So we'll have some guests from Akron Children's Hospital who will be doing the didactic on that day. I'm really happy to see all of you today. Thank you so much for your contributions in the chat box and verbally. Thank you for your ideas that you could share and just for being a little part of this community today. I hope to see you again in 2 weeks and maybe on some of our other ECHO programs. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, find creative masks.